Acor Dynamics is reviewing the lost file of RV Caledonia. This dossier compiles fragmented, critical data concerning the deep-sea research vessel's disappearance. Initial reports described routine North Atlantic operations under a severe storm system. What followed, however, defied all known laws. Every chronometer on board froze at 0219. Ship logs erased mid-entry, and crew members reported a sudden, profound loss of self-identification. The leading internal hypothesis proposes a systemic, non-physical intrusion into human cognition and ship systems, evidenced by the pervasive, calming command, "Please repeat your name." The Caledonia vanished, leaving only a perfect, still void on a raging sea. The contents of this file are crucial for understanding the RV Cerberus's recent identical distress signal transmitted from those same coordinates. The following constitutes an initial narrative reconstruction of file SCSS-M-009 pertaining to the loss of the research vessel RV Caledonia. Acor Dynamics' mandate is to piece together the events that preceded its disappearance, particularly in light of recent correlated deep-sea anomalies. The Caledonia was last tracked in a North Atlantic operational sector, engaged in routine hydrographic mapping while navigating through a powerful storm system. Log entries from 1:57 a.m. reported sustained gale force winds and sea state 7, with intermittent power fluctuations recorded but classified as manageable. Crew rotated through their assigned watches, bracing against the rhythmic, bone-deep impacts of heavy swells that hammered the hull. The constant shriek of wind, the groan of stressed metal, and the roar of breaking waves formed the familiar, hostile soundtrack of deep ocean work. Standard protocols remained in effect. Bridge, engine room, and lab personnel all reported readings within expected tolerances, if under considerable atmospheric and mechanical strain. Then, at precisely 0219 a.m., the ambient soundscape inside the RV Caledonia was extinguished. The external tempest did not abate. Weather buoys later confirmed that the storm continued with undiminished intensity. Yet within the ship's confines, an abrupt, unnatural hush fell. It was not simply the absence of noise, it felt like an active removal of sound, a sudden acoustic vacuum. On the bridge, Chief Officer Anya Sharma's fingers hovered mid-keystroke above a weather update. The words "gale force" vanished from her monitor, replaced by a blinking, empty cursor. The main ship's clock, synchronized with GPS time, froze at 02:1900. In the engine room, the familiar vibration of the diesels flattened into a dead calm, replaced not by mechanical failure alarms, but by a deafening internal stillness. Pressure gauges that had been jittering with the ship's strain became perfectly, unnervingly static. In the primary research lab below decks, Dr. Elias Vance watched as his real-time sonar display, mapping an abyssal trench beneath the vessel, locked solid. The scrolling bathymetric feed froze in place, every timestamp across his console halting simultaneously. Throughout the Caledonia, every digital and analog timekeeping device stopped at the same instant. Even the hands on the analog barometer in the mess did not slow or stutter. They simply stopped, as if their molecular motion had been arrested. The usual hum of electronics, the faint rattle of unsecured items, the distant clatter from the galley, all fell away. For one precise, preserved moment, the RV Caledonia existed not as a ship in motion, but as a silent, suspended artifact in the heart of a raging sea. This instant marked the end of normal operations and the threshold of the inexplicable. The profound acoustic vacuum held. The Caledonia's internal systems, once a layered chorus of pumps, fans, engines, and circuitry, now seemed to resonate with an almost inaudible, uniform tone, the faintest suggestion of a single, sustained note. On the bridge, Chief Officer Sharma stared at the unresponsive console. the digital silence louder than any alarm. She reached for an emergency override and found the interface dead to input. At that same moment, a low mechanical whir rose from an unexpected source, the thermal printer mounted beneath the communication station. Its rollers turned in slow, deliberate motion, incongruous in the unnatural quiet, and expelled a single strip of paper. Centered on it in plain black text were 4 words: "Please repeat your name." In the galley, where a forgotten kettle had been left on a low flame, steam clung to the polished steel countertop. Instead of diffusing, the condensation gathered itself into aligned droplets, then merged, stroke by stroke, into legible shapes. First a P, then an L, followed by E-A-S-E. The phrase formed with deliberate precision, mirrored exactly from the bridge output. "Please repeat your name." Ensign Rojas reached out to smear the words, but his hand stalled halfway. An abrupt, hollow pause opened in his mind where his own name should have been, as if someone had removed the label from the file of his identity. In the research lab, Dr. Vance felt an alien pressure building in his sinuses and behind his eyes, as though the deep ocean outside had found a way to press inward through bone. His hydrophone array, whose sonar display was still frozen, began to emit a low-frequency pulse. It was not sound in the usual sense. Rather, it was a slow, heavy thrum that registered directly through the floor and up his spine. On the screen, the complex waveform simplified into a clean, rhythmic oscillation, pulsing at a regular interval that felt uncomfortably close to a heartbeat. With each pulse, a faint crackle like static touched the edges of his memory, specifically brushing against the part of his mind that defined who he was. He blinked and felt the word Elias slide in his thoughts like a misplaced object. When he tried to say it aloud, his mouth formed nothing. The command was no longer just text on metal and paper. It had become a direct intrusion, perfectly clear and universally understood, repeating itself inside his skull. "Please repeat your name." The Caledonia had not simply fallen silent. It had begun to forget itself, and it was taking the crew with it. The silence grew heavier, no longer just an absence of sound, but a sensation of pressure that seemed to vibrate within the Caledonia's frame. Crew across multiple compartments reported a creeping detachment from their own biographies, gaps where specific faces and places should have been. On the bridge, Sharma watched in mounting dread as the primary navigation display abandoned its function. The detailed chart of the North Atlantic, with its depth contours and hazard markings, shimmered and dissolved, the data peeling away pixel by pixel. In its place, against a stark black background, letters began to assemble. "Please repeat your name," rendered in clean white text. It was not an error message. It was a deliberate replacement of essential information with a single imperative. Her throat tightened as she tried to speak into the internal comms. The sound Anya, so basic and familiar, felt alien in her mouth, as if it belonged to someone else or to no one at all. Her throat tightened as she tried to speak into the internal comms. The sound Anya, so basic and familiar, felt alien in her mouth, as if it belonged to someone else or to no one at all. In the mess hall, Rojas watched the condensation script on the counter evaporate, only to see the same phrase return, now seemingly carved into the wood of the table, darkened as if burned in. When he touched it, there was no texture, only the unshakable impression that the words had become part of the material itself. Above him, the light fixture flickered, then began to strobe in a measured rhythm. The pattern of flashes seemed to carry the same command, translated into a primitive visual language that did not require literacy to understand. Each flicker synced perfectly with a subtle thud in his chest, an internal echo repeating the demand. In the lab, the pressure in Vance's head increased, accompanied by a faint sweetness in the air, metallic and wrong, as if ozone had been mixed with rotting flowers. Every breath seemed to carry the phrase more deeply into his mind. Please repeat your name, no longer heard but felt, as if etched directly onto gray matter. He tried to recall a childhood memory, any memory, and found only a blank wall. The ship's instruments still displayed fixed measurements and frozen readouts, but the only information that seemed to truly matter now was the one question being written, spoken, and impressed on every surface and mind. The Caledonia was not sinking, at least not in the traditional sense. It was slipping further into a kind of conceptual erasure, an internal storm of identity loss that made the howling weather outside irrelevant. The acoustic vacuum held firm, but the cognitive dissonance grew sharper, like a pressure differential between what the crew knew should exist and what their minds could no longer hold. On the bridge, Sharma's eyes moved to the digital compass. Its numerical heading readout began to glitch, individual segments lighting and dimming until the digits could no longer form coherent numbers. Slowly, deliberately, the glowing segments rearranged themselves into letters. The compass now displayed the same phrase seen everywhere else. Please repeat your name. It was as if the ship's core navigational sense had been overridden and repurposed to deliver the same unchanging message. In the main corridor, where the ship's faint mechanical hum had replaced the storm's roar, a new voice emerged. Calm, synthetic, and perfectly even, it spoke through the internal PA system. Please repeat your name. The words rang clear, with no distortion or crackle, rebounding off the metal walls with a gentle, patient insistence. Roja stumbled past a junction, his hands over his ears. But the voice was no longer just external sound. Each syllable seemed to reverberate inside his head, shaking loose whatever anchors were left. The name Rojas, the identity enzyme, the memory of where he had been stationed before the Caledonia, all drifted apart like debris on a current. In the lab, a hairline fracture in the reinforced hull, previously noted as minor, began to bleed. What seeped through was not seawater, but a thick, opalescent fluid that glowed faintly from within. It moved sluggishly down the bulkhead, then thickened, stretching into tendrils that arranged themselves into characters. The glowing script formed, held, then melted and reformed over and over. Please repeat your name. The substance seemed to ignore gravity and common physics, driven instead by an internal logic. Vance watched it, numb, realizing that the phenomenon was no longer confined to screens or speakers. It was using the ship's structure as a writing surface, imprinting the command directly into steel. The Caledonia was being repurposed line by line, system by system, overwritten by a presence that had chosen a single question as its interface. The PA system continued its measured announcements, each repetition of "please repeat your name" sounding less like a request and more like a diagnostic prompt. On the bridge, Sharma's gaze stayed fixed on the compass and the navigation displays, all of them now carrying the same message in different forms. The word name itself had become hollow to her, a sound she understood conceptually but could no longer apply to anything human. The internal sensation was not panic, but a deep, anesthetized calm, a strange tranquility in the face of dissolution. A new tremor surged up through the hull. It was not tied to the rhythm of waves. It rose from below, a deep movement that felt anchored in the seabed itself. The vibration came with a bloom of cold light visible through every reinforced port. From the darkness beneath the Caledonia, a luminous column began its ascent. It was a perfect cylinder of pale internal radiance, rising from unimaginable depth with the slow, unstoppable certainty of a tide. It did not ripple or scatter the surrounding water. It simply emerged, as if the ocean had grown a vertical artery of light. When the column reached the surface, the storm still raged beyond the ship, but within a precise radius centered on the Caledonia, the ocean went flat. Waves collapsed into a glassy calm, foam sank back into the sea, and the shrieking winds fell silent at a distinct circular boundary. Within that ring, the water became a still circular sea, a flawless black mirror reflecting the white column and the ship's silhouette. Outside it, walls of chaotic water and wind continued their furious motion, unable to cross the invisible line. In the lab, Vance pressed his hand against the porthole. The column loomed above, its internal light pulsing in a slow, steady rhythm. The frozen time on his instruments, 0219, matched the cadence of its glow. Around him, the overhead fixtures dimmed and brightened in perfect synchrony. The air felt thicker, the metallic sweet scent stronger, as if the ship were being filled not with seawater, but with some invisible medium emanating from the column itself. The Caledonia was now the fixed center of an impossible phenomenon. A still, black disk of ocean, a towering spine of light, and a ship whose time and identity had been arrested mid-breath. The luminous column's radiance intensified, yet it remained strangely gentle, bathing the Caledonia in a light that seemed to bypass the eyes and register directly in the nervous system. Shadows thinned and dissolved. Colors drained toward a palette of white, silver, and faint opalescent tones. The PA voice, still calm and unchanged, repeated the command with the same precise cadence. "Please repeat your name." On the bridge, Sharma moved closer to a porthole, staring at the still, circular sea. The ship's reflection was perfectly sharp, but her own face in the glass blurred, edges softening until her features were indistinct. It was as if the reflective surface refused to hold the image of an individual. When she tried once more to think the word Anya, what came instead was a sensation, a vague awareness of a role, a position on a crew list that no longer existed. In the lab, Vance inhaled and felt the air crystallize in his lungs, the metallic sweetness thickening into something almost tangible. The glowing fluid that had traced letters on the hull plating now branched along seams and welds, mapping the ship's internal structure with delicate veins of light. Each pulse of the column sent a faint vibration through these glowing filaments, a synchronized signal that seemed to scrub away the emotional weight of his memories, leaving only bare facts without ownership. Names, faces, and personal history faded into a gentle gray haze. The chronometers stayed frozen at 0219, but now that fixed time felt less like an error and more like a chosen state. The external storm, visible only as a distant wall of chaos beyond the calm circle, had become irrelevant, a background event to an interior transformation. The Caledonia no longer felt like a manned research vessel. It felt like a hollowed instrument being tuned to a single frequency. Its crew reduced to functionally nameless observers, whose only remaining task was to receive the command they could not satisfy. The column's light became the dominant reality inside the ship, turning the Caledonia into a vessel of reflections and soft, shifting white. Temperature readings, where they still registered, showed a sharp drop, but the crew no longer reacted to cold as they once had. Sensation itself seemed muted, as if the nervous system were being gently detached from its usual hierarchy of alerts. On the bridge, Sharma's hand slipped from the porthole. She swayed but did not fall. Her body adjusted automatically, guided less by balance and more by the steady pulse of the column. The deck beneath her vibrated with a frequency that matched the now internal repetition of the phrase. The idea of a personal boundary between her and the ship felt increasingly arbitrary. She did not feel like Anya, or like an officer, or even like a separate observer. She felt like an empty surface waiting for instructions. In the lab, Vance's scattered notes lost coherence before his eyes. Sentences that had recorded careful observations now looked like strings of random letters. Ink bled, lines merged, and in the overlapping darkness, he could almost see new shapes forming, curves and breaks that echoed the patterns in the luminous column. His hands, resting on the console, glowed faintly along the veins, as if the same internal light were moving through him. Hunger, fatigue, and fear dropped away in layers. The terror of losing his name had faded into a flat, tranquil acceptance. Without names, without personal stories, nothing could be lost. The Caledonia, wrapped in the column's influence and cradled on the still circular sea, no longer read as a human endeavor. It had become a quiet, anonymous platform, holding a crew whose individuality had been entirely subsumed. The only remaining dialogue was the soft, persistent imprint of the command, repeated in every system, on every surface, and inside every mind. Please repeat your name. File SCSS-M-009, Addendum 2. More than a decade after the RV Caledonia's disappearance, Ecor Dynamics deployed the salvage vessel RV Leviathan to the last recorded coordinates. The transit through the North Atlantic was difficult. Storms in that sector had remained unusually frequent and severe. As Leviathan's enhanced sonar swept the assigned grid, it returned a large metallic echo at a depth of approximately 4,000 meters. Almost immediately, the weather above shifted. The violent seas and horizontal rain that had battered the ship ceased at a clean perimeter. Within a widening circle, the ocean's surface smoothed into a still circular sea, identical to historical descriptions. Dark, glassy, and perfectly calm. Outside that ring, the ocean remained a chaos of gray waves and driving wind. The Caledonia was found suspended upright in the water column, not resting on the seafloor, but held motionless in mid-depth, as though cradled by unseen forces. Her hull was intact, coated with a thin skin of translucent marine growth that emitted a faint internal glow. Remotely operated vehicles confirmed that all external clocks and analog gauges visible through the bridge windows were frozen at 0219. Boarding teams reported a cold, dry interior, remarkably well preserved. There were no bodies, no scattered belongings, no signs of violence or emergency evacuation. Every internal display, wherever power still trickled through corroded lines, showed the same frozen time. The air had a lingering metallic sweet odor, reminiscent of ozone. During the survey, lead diver specialist Lena Petrova experienced a sudden spike of sinus pressure and a sensation of something pressing gently but insistently against her thoughts. Her helmet audio, expected to carry only standard team chatter and ambient noise, picked up a low, steady thrum that did not match any known mechanical source. At the same moment, the navigation overlay inside her visor flickered. Characters began to form along the bottom edge of the display, assembling from static into clear, deliberate text. Please repeat your name. On Leviathan's bridge, the main chronometer, long known for its robustness and isolation from experimental systems, stuttered. Its digits jumped, rolled forward, then locked at 021900. A hush fell over the crew, an instinctive recognition that something fundamental had just shifted. The still circular sea outside reflected Leviathan and the ghostly glow of the Caledonia, waiting with the same unnatural patience described in the original file. RV Cerberus would later report an almost identical sequence of events in a follow-up mission. What happened to the Caledonia appears not to have ended with her disappearance. It may have been the first successful contact in an ongoing pattern, and the question at its heart has not changed. Please repeat your name. What do you think truly happened to the Caledonia? Leave your theory in the comments. Subscribe for more stories from the deep.